Welcome back to the Budding Author Podcast. I'm Simon Ward, your host, and today we're talking to Laurie Nave. Laurie Nave, human, multidimensional, flawed, valuable. She writes books. Hi, Laurie. I love that
Hello.
profile. That's a great sort of kick-off to things. Within your writing world, we've got psychological thrillers and children's books. That's essentially it. What got you into writing to start with, Laurie?
I have always loved to write. My mom likes to tell the story that when I was 3 or 4 years old, I would dictate to her and she would write them down because I couldn't write yet.
Oh,
And
amazing.
she says my first story was about some sort of mouse and I liked rhyming. So it's something about I like mice. They are nice. They eat ice. I don't know. It was really brilliant, I'm sure. But and writing was always kind of my therapy too. I was an sturdy, sort of nerdy, awkward child, and
Yeah,
when I couldn't be myself anywhere else, I just wrote stories. So,
and it's all the stories in your head. It's getting out. How many have you published so far?
uh, seven if you count the suspense and the children's stories.
Yeah, I think sort of life gets in the way sometimes, doesn't it? What were you doing before? What was your main job?
Well, for 16 years, I was a general music teacher. I taught some junior high, middle school. I'm not sure what it's called where you are, 11 through 14 age. And
Yeah.
then for the last 10 years, I taught elementary school, which would be like 6 years old through 10 years old, first through fifth grade, general music and choir. And it is a really fun job, a very
Yeah,
active, busy job, but it was a fun job.
that
So,
sounds fun. I think music is has been a big part of my life. I love music, and my two boys have both played music. Um, my eldest played trumpet, and
oh, wow.
my youngest played clarinet. But my eldest is now teaching himself to play the guitar. So
Oh, yeah.
it's all there. It's the full spectrum. The full spectrum. That's good. Um, Working with the children in the sort of like the last 10 years or so, is that what got you into children's stories, writing children's stories?
Well, when I was a music teacher, I noticed there are all sorts of children's books, which I used in my classroom, Dr. Seuss, that were about other things, but there weren't a lot of high interest, low level, as we call them, easy to read but interesting children's books, specifically about music skills, about composers, that sort of thing. And I also used a method to teach music called the Orff method, which I won't go into, but it's basically very rhythmic
Yeah.
and uses a lot of instruments. And so I would write rhyming stories about whole notes and half notes, or rhyming stories about the instruments of the orchestra. And we would read them together, and then we would use parts of them to create these rhythmic chants using the instruments. And that way they learned about music while playing music. And so
Oh,
that's
that's
really
clever.
where the children's thing started.
Yeah, that's very clever. That is. With writing children's stories, it's a very difficult thing now, isn't it? Because knowing what you can put into the story and making sure you don't upset anybody. I know in you're on the sunny southeast. We hear a lot of stories about the books that are going into schools now, and it's not really appropriate sort of language, really. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I am very anti censorship with a caveat. I do believe books should be appropriate for the venue. For example, Um, if it's a primary school, which would be kindergarten through third grade, so 5 through 8, there are certain books and certain language and topics that I don't think need to be in that school library.
Yeah,
As you get into middle school and high school, I really think it's kind of a free for all. Those kids 12 and up are probably reading pretty much anything anyway.
yeah,
Um, but it's hard because you don't want to give the appearance of banning any book. But I do think in a public school, you have to take their age into account. So,
yeah. It is a difficult balance. I think we're in a world where we need to be sort of open to different viewpoints, but I think sometimes that can go too far, can't it?
Yeah, it can, but I think the bottom line is our children are going to be, as they grow, exposed to a lot of a
Yeah,
variety of things as they grow. And so we might as well deal with that, face that, be parents. And if we want to teach them certain ways of viewing that, that's really our responsibility. I'm,
yeah,
I'm a mom too. And I never thought it was the school's job to cater to my particular view. I felt
yeah.
like that was my job.
I think from my point of view, the school should be showing and demonstrating the standard, the norm sort of thing. But obviously, but what is now considered normal sort of changes every 5 minutes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole because that'll probably get us both in trouble. The psychological thrillers, um, you must be
Well,
quite dark to go into that world.
it's so funny because I mean, with the blonde hair and the kind of bouncy personality, it always shocks people that I'm really fascinated by sociopaths and psychopaths and how the dark mind thinks. And I've always had a vivid imagination. I still have very vivid dreams, lots of nightmares. And I mean, if you're not going to use that, what's the point? I started writing the first suspense novel, actually, actually, when I had someone online that was somewhat stalking me. This was like 12 or 13 years ago. And I would never actually commit violence, but it was kind of fun writing about what I might do to them if I ever met them in person.
Ah, got you. So,
And I
so
thought, well, I can't do this, but this might make a pretty good book. So I twisted it around and I, thought, well, what's it like inside the mind of a sociopath? And it grew into this journalist interviewing a female serial killer on death row and learning to some chagrin that they actually have some things in common.
yeah,
And then Celia, the journalist, also has a stalker of her own. And she has to decide, am I going to deal with this the legal way or am I going to deal with this the way the serial killer might have? So that was, and then people loved it. And they really loved one of the characters that was Celia's friend. So the second book emerged, and then
yeah.
I really wanted to explore a character that was supposed to just say 3 words and then be gone in the first book, an elderly lady that was a neighbor, and then the third one was born. So, and now I thought I was completely done, but I'm actually working on a fourth now. So
I love with writing how the characters take over and write their own stories.
they do,
That's
they do. Yeah.
a marvelous world for it now. I think the the challenge with the psychological thrillers is keeping it connected. I think because it's easy to take that sort of past a point the reader can sort of relate to. So
Yeah.
it's obviously everybody that's reading that is not a sort of a psychopath.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
One would
It's,
hope. One would hope there's not that many.
yeah. Well, they say 4% of the population are sociopaths. I don't know where they got that number. And I don't know if it's too low or too high. A really good sociopath, you would never know. So I did
Yeah,
a little bit of research. But I think you have to keep in mind, what can a regular person who happens to like to watch ID television, and with all those, what can they stomach? I mean, as a reader, there are some wonderful authors, and I'm not going to name any that I love, but a couple whose books, certain books, I couldn't finish reading because it was so disturbing. It was just like, I can't read that, but particularly if it involves children. And that's
yeah,
probably because I'm a mom. But so you have to be careful that you don't go so dark side that, the person has to put it down or face nightmares.
yeah. I think I've been writing a young adult series, and there are some dark themes in that. Um, so that's a difficult one to cross because you want to create drama, and generally drama is not going to be all sweetness and light. So it's what you can include in that
Yeah.
without sort of making too many triggers. I think, is it true to say that some people will be triggered whatever's in there?
Yeah. And I was actually not that active on social media when I published like the first one, maybe even the second. And so in my little insulated world, I didn't even know there was such a thing as trigger warnings. So my suspense novels don't have them, but if you read the back, people are going to die and there are going to be some disturbing characters. So
Yeah,
hopefully that's sufficient. If I were to write, let's say, something literary or dramatic that involved certain types of abuse or something, I would definitely, if not in the beginning, I would definitely say there may be disturbing themes. See the back of the book for a list. That way, the ones that don't want to see the warning and want to just get it don't have a spoiler, but the ones that really can't handle certain things won't be shocked. I know that's a controversial take, but there are some things that if I read it in a book are going to affect me. So I don't want to do that to somebody else. So
but sometimes if somebody's reading a book and you've already told them the certain things are going to be in that book, is that not spoiling it for the reader?
that's why I would probably put it in the back. I may take, and I have no plans to write a book like this, but let's say child sexual abuse. That's
Yeah,
something I've experienced. So it's a little bit disturbing to me. I
yeah,
wouldn't put that was in a book at the beginning. I would say there are some disturbing themes in this book. If you'd like to know what those might be, please turn to page, 321 in the back. And that way,
yeah.
if somebody's like, I don't want to spoil it, they can just skip that. But if somebody's like, I really need to know, they can turn and look. That would be the way I would do it if I did it, just so that they have the choice of whether it is spoiled or not.
I don't know whether I should say this because this is a bit of a giveaway. In one of my books, in I won't say which book it is because that'll sort of open it up a little bit. But there's a baby that's killed. Now it's part of a technological awakening, sort of like an AI
Oh, wow. That
sort
sounds
of.
interesting.
I'm thinking that's, some people say that's perhaps a strong trigger, but the way I put it across, there's two characters. There's one character that you don't know at all. The is not particularly a well put across very well in a nice light, and she loses her baby.
Yeah.
The one that follows her in is the character that we know more about, and she gets away from that.
Yeah.
And I needed to put the first one in to raise the stakes for the second
Right.
one.
Right.
And if I didn't put the first one in, then the real danger would not have been there.
Yeah.
But I was very careful to make the first one not a particularly likable person,
Yeah.
somebody who really sort of upset the apple cart and sort of
Yeah.
was sort of, people wouldn't exactly wish that on them,
Yeah.
but
But you're
hadn't
not as
particularly become
sympathetic. Yeah.
hadn't particularly become endeared to them.
Well, I
Now
think
then,
I think loss happens in real life and it usually happens without warning. So I'm not sure loss needs a trigger. But for this, and I won't name the author. They're a wonderful author and I read their books. But in one particular book, it had to do with child trafficking. And in one chapter, they opened the door, as in describing what was being done to the 12-year-old girl in a sexual manner. That to me was something I just was like, mm.
yeah, I think,
So that to me is different than someone being killed because
yeah, yeah.
you have to expect that, especially in certain genres. If it's psychological thriller, people are going to die, So
I think I would definitely have an issue with that. Sort of harming sort of children, particularly in a sexual manner. I think that's a big red flag for most people. I think that's not a good direction to go for a writer, is it?
Well, on one hand, that kind of horror happens, and I can see the logic in we're not going to shy away from this. We want you to be uncomfortable because this is awful. But personally, it was something I couldn't read because of what I had been through as a child.
Yeah.
And so, I'm I feel like write whatever you want, of course within reason. Don't write a Hitler manifesto, but then again, readers should have choices. Now, if I wrote horror, I probably wouldn't even think about trigger warnings because it's horror. If you don't
Yeah.
know ahead of time,
They
it's
know
going
what
to
they're
scare
getting.
the
Yeah.
crap out of you. Then it's horror. But
I had an interesting conversation with David Applegate, and we were talking about the heat level in romantic situations, and he was saying that people have issues with graphic sex scenes, but not graphic horror scenes.
I know it's so strange. Yeah.
That's I was saying because some of my books that the heat level was too high, and I edited them to reduce the heat level. And then people asked for the other version, which after
Yeah.
I've changed it.
Well, there is a huge market for the. I'm not going to tell you my pen name because just in case my Baptist mom sees this or something. But in 2012, 13, in the wake of a very popular, very explicit series of books that came on the market, a friend of mine challenged me to write one because I said, "Oh, I don't really like the writing in this." And they said, "Well, why don't you write one?" And I was reading those kind of books, as a middle-aged woman at the time. So I actually published 2 books in a certain publisher's spanking series that were pretty explicit. And, they're fun to write. But
Yeah.
actually, my one historical romance was supposed to be the 3rd one, but I decided not to publish it. And I had my daughter change a character, do some editing for me from first person to third person, but I forgot how spicy it was. And she's grown, but she said, I know you agreed to pay me X amount, but I think I'm going to have to charge a sin tax for reading this. you know. And so I'm not opposed to a lot of heat as long as I know it's coming.
Yeah, I think my Awakening series, I have reduced the heat level, but I read a portion because I've had some interest from a film producer, so I've written a script. And when I was writing the script from the novel, obviously, I thought, hang on, I thought I'd reduced the heat level on this. So it is still quite spicy, and that's good. But I do have an idea for a particularly spicy series of short stories I'm planning to do. But I think putting that under a pen name is probably the right thing. But then with something like that, how do you promote that? Because you're not going to promote it through your socials.
Yeah.
Unless you create another social with a pen name, and I don't know whether I can be done with that.
I think even though mine were published in 2012 and the first part of 2013, even in that 11 years, things are so vastly different. See, back then, this particular company published your book and also promoted it and everything else.
Yeah.
And it was not a wild bestseller or anything. It earned out and made a little extra, but I didn't even think about promotion because it was a pen name, and B, I just didn't think about it. But now you do have to think about things like that. I guess you could create an entire online persona around that pen name and then use that to promote. But and maybe it would add some mystique if nobody ever saw your picture or knew who you were.
It sounds like a lot of hard work, that doesn't it? Maybe just writing it under the pen name and under the pen name and just advertising.
Yeah.
Has advertising worked for you, Laurie?
Actually, of course, I post my books on Twitter and Facebook and things like that. And I actually, even though Facebook, they say, is the old person's social media now, I get a lot more traction there. And I don't know if it's because Twitter has so many authors, but, and honestly, my in-person events that I've done have generated a lot of spreading interest. In-person events, doing some book clubs have read my books, and that seems to create a lot of loyal readers who then tell other people about the book.
Yeah.
But I've never paid, one of those Amazon advertising or a book funnel or whatever.
Our
Mainly
promo
because I
promo
can't.
sites, yeah.
Yeah, I'm cheap, A, and B, I just don't have the extra hundreds of dollars to do it. So
I had one of those talking to me, and I nearly put it on the show because it was terrible, really. If the internet connection had been better, I'd have probably posted it. They contacted me via Twitter, book promotions, and the cover image looked very impressive. Obviously, people's profile picture is not always the day-to-day picture. It's sort of very la-di-da picture, but this was definitely not the same person. And when we had a conversation, she really struggled to understand the language.
yeah.
And she just kept repeating, "Oh, so what package would you like? The expensive or the more expensive package?" And when I asked a deeper question, sort of like, what qualifications have you got that make you an expert promoter? And she said, "Oh, we promote your book. Which package would you like?" And she
Yeah.
just didn't sort of understand what I was saying. And I think I'm fairly easy to understand, really.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
so yeah, it was shocking, really. I can remember talking with Tori McAllister. That's a good interview, and he said anybody that contacts him through social media for book promotions, his first question is, "Have you read my book?"
Oh, that's a good idea.
Because they'll say, "Oh, we really love your book. We'd like to promote your book." So, have you read it?
Crickets. But
Yeah, it's sort of it all goes a bit quiet on them then. Um, yeah, you have to be careful because writing wise, as far as book sales are concerned, you can put a lot of money out there. I think what you're doing there with sort of in-person events and book clubs, which is like an extension of that, is perhaps a very good way of doing that. I talked to Dylan West recently, and Dylan West has always have some books in his backpack. So, and I keep meaning to do that. I've put them in my car. That's probably as far as I've got.
Yeah, I always have some in my car, and I tell him I should hire him to be my agent, but my husband always has some in his truck. And everywhere we go, it's almost embarrassing. We'll go out to eat, and if the waitress gets chatty and says, "Oh, well, what do y'all do?" And I'll say, "I work at a university," and my husband will break in and say, "She's also a writer. Do you like to read suspense books?" Blah, blah. I'm like, okay, calm down.
Well, my best buddy is perhaps a big champion of my writing in that respect. When we're out, he'll be saying, "Oh, he's a famous author." I was like, "Well, I'm not really that famous," but my wife's much more shy, I guess, and she would get embarrassed by me sort of peddling my book, sort of thing. Particularly as my first three novels did have a bit of spice in them.
Ah,
So she maps a little bit embarrassed on that. The YA fiction I'm doing now, maybe she'll be more confident to talk about that because it's not got the heat level in and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, my husband, they say there are extroverts and introverts. If there's such thing as the uber extrovert, that's my husband. There is,
Yeah, that's
I mean, in line at the grocery store, you know, never meets a stranger. Every time we go anywhere, there's somebody he knows. So even if we were at a random fast food place on our way to see my parents in some nowhere town, and up drives a guy in a big truck, and he deals in the parts for the big 18-wheeler trucks. And Larry knew him, and I was like, really? So,
I think I'm probably a mix of a introvert extrovert, probably more extrovert. But compared to my mate is sort of like, oh, he is the uber extrovert. But it's nice. It's nice when you go out and people recognise you and that sort of thing. So that's good.
yeah.
Before we finish, guilty pleasure. What's your guilty pleasure?
Mm, I like to watch um, really, I like to watch supernaturally monstery shows over and over. I have probably watched the television show Supernatural 10 times. I've probably watched the series Grimm 6 or 7 times. And in the absence of anything else, especially the days that I work remotely from my house, one of
Yeah.
those shows will be on in the background. And I just am so into them. I am in love with Dean Winchester. I'm equally in love with Monroe on Grimm. And
Yeah.
my husband knows this. So, but those I will watch those over and over and over. That and
Yeah.
cheese dip. If you put cheese dip and tortilla chips in front of me, they will
Oh,
be
it's
gone.
chocolate for me. Chocolate
Ah,
and vodka and Pepsi and chocolate. That's
oh, well, I should probably add Coke Zero. I will. My husband just is aghast at how much Coke Zero I drink. But I tell him it could be vodka or wine. You should be happy. But
yeah. We have to balance it all, don't we, with good food and healthy stuff as well. Laurie, this has been fantastic. You
well,
are
thank
a
you so
gem.
much.
You are a
Thank
gem.
you. I've enjoyed talking to you too. And of course, especially Southern Americans, anyone with an accent across the pond, we just love to talk to. So,
I could slip in. I could slip into the real accent from where I am.
oh,
Um, People think I have an accent when they're not here, but then people who are local think I don't have an accent at all.
yeah.
Because let me see if I can get into this. You're all right, Laurie. Would
Oh, I
be
like that. Yes. Yeah. Now, I'm using my voiceover for training accent today, but when I'm around Larry, who talks just like any country star you've ever heard, my voice starts to go into this. But when people hear you talk like this, they assume your IQ is real low. So I try not to do that.
yeah. Well, same here really, and that's brilliant, excellent. Hope everybody's enjoyed the show. It's going to be on podcast as well as on YouTube, so make sure you subscribe to both of those and catch all our shows. Nice one. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Laurie. Nice to meet
Thanks.
you.